Okay, so I thought we would start by looking at some literary key terms, and these are also available in as a handout on the course homepage. So we are going to just introduce you to some of these keywords that I'll be using as we're discussing the short stories and throughout our discussions of the course texts. So these are probably review for most of you, but we'll look at a couple of examples and refresh your memory and get an idea of some important terms that you can become more familiar with. So our first two terms are examples of figurative language, metaphor and a simile. So you should be able to distinguish between and identify metaphors and similes. A metaphor is a comparison between two unlike things, and it does not use like or as. A simile is also a comparison between two things, but it uses like or as. So our examples are taken from popular music, and our first example is from Simon and Garfunkel. Uh, Gazing from my window to the streets below on a freshly fallen silent shroud of snow, I am a rock, I am an island. So if I was to ask you guys to identify a figure of speech or literary device in this passage, I would probably want you to identify a metaphor. There's two metaphors actually. I am a rock, I am an island. And here's the comparison is between two unlike things. So the person speaking, the I, and then he's comparing himself to a rock and to an island. So we have two metaphors, a comparison without using like or as. Next example is our simile. This is from a Nelly Furtado song. She sings, I'm like a bird, I'll only fly away, I don't know where my soul is. So she's using a comparison. The speaker is comparing herself to a bird and using the word like. So we know right away that this is a simile and not a metaphor. So here are our next two literary terms. Allegory is one that's going to be that we're going to talk about quite a lot in this class, and it refers to a story that has more than one meaning to it. So it has a literal meaning, and then it has a more figurative meaning. And I often sort of compare it to, if I was using a metaphor, I would sort of say an allegory is kind of like an onion, where you can just peel back layer after layer and find more meaning as the deeper you go within the story. So one example from popular culture would be the film Avatar. On a literal level, this is just a movie about invading an alien planet. And if we sort of dig deeper into the story, we can start making connections to other sort of narratives that exist. So we can see this as sort of connecting to our own history, so a colonial history where North American society was sort of colonized, and the Avatar aliens are similar to sort of the colonized nation, so they are invaded, their land is threatened, and they must protect it from the invading colonial forces. So we have a historical allegory in Avatar, so it's not just about aliens, it's also somewhat of a commentary on a historical event in our past. The next literary term we can think about is tone, and this one is somewhat hard to pick out for some students, but it's the overall impression produced by a work. So it's sort of how it makes you feel, the atmosphere or mood that is evoked in the narrative. So you can think about tone in regards to whether or not the material has an uplifting or optimistic tone, or is it sort of spooky and gothic and horror, disturbing in that regard? Is it ironic? or satirical. So is it trying to sort of make fun of something or ridicule or forces you to sort of question the narrative at all? Is it humorous? So there's lots of different sort of tones that can be sort of evoked by a piece of literature, and we'll look at lots of different examples in our short stories. So these are some other key terms. Hyperbole, this one's more for poetry, but again, it's good to know at this point as well. So a hyperbole is just an exaggeration, and I've taken an example from the Proclaimers song, I Would Walk 500 Miles. So really it's just an exaggerated claim, and the song is about, again, he's sort of speaking to his love interest and promising her the world and exaggerating what he would do for her. And here he says, I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more just to be the man who walks 1,000 miles to fall down at your door. So it's very romantic sentiment, and we'll see a lot of hyperbole when we're discussing poetry, love poetry. It seems to be something that poets always use. They like to make exaggerated claims. And then we'll also look at diction, and diction is just a sort of fancy word for word choice, vocabulary, that type of thing. So authors always use sort of words strategically. Sometimes their language is formal or informal or colloquial, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes they're using concrete language, or they're using abstract, figurative language. So it's important to sort of be able to look at the word choice in any given piece of writing and be able to sort of look at the multiple meanings that maybe that author is trying to evoke in the reader. And my example is just a silly one. So from Mean Girls, that was so fetch. I don't know. It's an example of a colloquial or informal, even a made-up word. We have two other terms, so a symbol and an allusion. So a symbol is often a material object used to represent an abstract idea. And here I've used an example of a symbol or sort of imagery on the Nirvana album Nevermind, and it's a little naked baby underwater, and then there's a dollar bill there. So if we were in a classroom, I would sort of get you guys to sort of add your interpretations of maybe what's being symbolized in this image. But I would, expect you guys to maybe attach this image to materialism or the drive for capitalism, maybe some sort of commentary on how we socialize our children to strive to be rich and wealthy and have things. So something like that. So again, we can sort of offer our interpretations of symbols in any form of text, whether it's a visual text like the Nirvana album cover or a short story or poem. There's always sort of symbolic elements that we can sort of read into, and that's part of the fun of taking English class, is to sort of offer your interpretations of things that are sort of ambiguous, and again, add your own twist to your interpretation. And then we have the next key term, which is an allusion, and this is just a reference to another piece of writing within a piece of writing. So it could be an implied or indirect reference in literature, often to another piece of literature. Often you'll get allusions to the Bible or maybe to a Greek myth. In this example, this is a Taylor Swift song, and she sings, I see you make your way through the crowd and say hello. Little did I know that you were Romeo. So if I were in a classroom, I would ask you guys to point out the allusion. Here I'll just explain that Romeo is an allusion to the Shakespeare play, Romeo and Juliet. So Taylor Swift's song is making an allusion to Shakespeare play in this case. So in fiction, we also can talk about sort of the characters and characterization that is part of any piece of writing, fiction writing. And two terms that you should be familiar with is the protagonist. This is our central character, our hero. of a piece of literature or a film. And then we also have an antagonist. So this would be the person who the main character is in conflict with and the enemy or villain of the story. So in this example, I'm using Mean Girls again, where we have our hero, Katie, and then we have the antagonist, Serena George, I think her name was. And again, protagonist and antagonist is present in many films, so we could think about Harry Potter and Voldemort, or again, I'm sure you have a million examples, Batman and Joker. There's always some sort of opposition that's often sort of almost archetypal hero and villain in a lot of narrative forms. You can also think about these two literary terms, so a narrator, which is the voice or voices telling the story, and you want to make sure that you are distinguishing the author from the narrator in your analysis of the story. For example, in Stephen King's Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, our narrator is one of the prisoners, and he is telling the story of his experience of meeting Andy Dufresne. This is a distinct voice from our author, Stephen King. So again, it's very important to sort of distinguish narrator from author. And the narrator, again, can be a reliable source of information, so we can believe everything they tell us, or you can have an unreliable narrator who, again, maybe there's some flaws or gaps in their story. In Mouse, we have Art Spiegelman's father narrating his history of surviving the Holocaust, and at some points he's mostly a reliable narrator, but there are sort of gaps in his memory, and sometimes he can't remember everything that happened, or his memory is just, he's an old man at this point, so there are sort of some things he misunderstands or misinterprets or can't remember exactly. So he's somewhat unreliable in some regards. And then we can also think about point of view. So this is the perspective from which the story is narrated. You can have a first person narrator, which is the I. So I go to the store, I get groceries. Second person is using you, and we'll see that in the wars is used a little bit. You walk into the store, you buy your groceries. It's more uncommon to find you, second person, being used in narrative, but you will find it sometimes. And then third person is probably the most common, so he or she. And you'll also find, sometimes it's omniscient, they call it, so you have full reign of that person's inside thoughts. That is an omniscient narrator, where the narrating voice tells us everything that's going on within the character's mind. And we get that in one of our first short stories, The Story of an Hour, where the omniscient narrator is able to sort of go inside Louise Mallard's mind and tell us all what she is feeling inside. So you have sort of different perspectives being used throughout different narratives that will. I think every piece of fiction has some sort of conflict. Sometimes we will see an external conflict. So in this example of Hunger Games, Katniss again has external forces that she's sort of in opposition against. She has to sort of face the elements of nature and face her other opponents in order to survive, so her conflict is external. Some characters have an internal conflict, right? So it's opposing forces within themselves that they are struggling to overcome. So their emotions, their conflicted emotions. And characterization is just in regards to how that character transforms over the course of the story, their personality, and their main character traits. So what kind of person is this? What adjectives would you use to describe them? And their psychological motivations as well. Last two I want to talk about is genre and setting. Genre is the type of literary work. Setting is the place and time